And we are live. Hey, welcome everyone. This is a Gadfly live stream. I want to thank you for tuning in. Please visit our work over at thegadfly.bhx.tv. Also, you can follow us on. We do have some social media handles. We do have a YouTube channel when we do release public content. You can jump over there and please hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow us as we release some of our content. You can go to Twitter, which our handles at the Gadfly MCN. And very excited today to be joined by London Paul of the SeriousReport.com and Ken Shortkin Jr. of Shotgun Economics. Gentlemen, great day. Lack of sleep for you, Paul. How's everyone doing today?
Yeah, you do very well. Yeah, no sleep, but who cares?
Morning, everybody.
Yes, good morning to everyone.
What's that? The Beastie Boys, No Sleep Till Brooklyn?
No sleep till Brooklyn. I'd play it, but we'd probably get flagged.
Yes, probably. Yeah, well, if it's No Sleep Till Brooklyn, I'm a bit screwed at the moment with the lockdown.
It was funny. I saw a tweet. I think Gus Demo sent this out. The tweet said, "Things are so crazy. The looter's not even sure what to do right now."
They just know to go after Washington D.C. You know, they're at least smart on that front.
Well, let's kick it off. It was an interesting night, so you guys go for it, and then I'll chime in from time to time. So you guys go at it.
Go ahead, Paul. Give your thoughts first here.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I somehow managed to record my own podcast, which and I don't mind recycling the views because I think, given the precedent of what it is, I think it'd be ridiculous to go, "Well, I discussed this elsewhere." I mean, we chewed a lot of things last night. And at that point, I think the conclusion was, well, from my perspective, I thought, Trump would win. Now, that doesn't mean Trump isn't going to win. But as I messaged you, if in principle, if Biden wins Nevada, Wisconsin, and Michigan, he's up to 270. So technically, he's won. I don't, there's a lot of thing about Pennsylvania. I don't think he's going to bridge the gap. I mean, it's in excess of 500,000, so I don't think so. North Carolina, possibly. Georgia, no, I don't think so. I mean, so therefore the argument is it's what's going to happen. Nevada apparently is postponed counting until Thursday, which a little bit strange. Why wait? Why not do it today? I think the last I looked, Wisconsin, I think Biden was 20,000 or so ahead. Michigan, he's about 10,000 ahead. So it's very sort of on a knife edge, literally. Now, that's notwithstanding the fact that whatever the outcome, there's going to be endless legal recourse. It's just, I mean, it could drag on days, it could drag on weeks, it could drag on months, and paralyze the U.S. nation at precisely the wrong time. So. And because you just know there's not going to be a resolution to this. No, whatever the outcome, whether Trump wins or Biden wins, there's going to be some case legal precedent set to challenge all manner of things. I mean, not least, the argument of voter fraud, and then, then the Biden camp will go, well, you discounted votes that should have been included, and it's just going to turn into this ugly mess. And in the process, US people are sat there going, well, there's no resolution. What's that going to do to the mindset of supporters on both sides? And maybe on some level, just as importantly, the world's looking at this going, hang on, this is the United States of America. What's going on? If this was any other nation in the world, the US would be going, these aren't free and fair elections. We need some sort of interference, sort of half joking, we need to send the UN in, etc., because there's a risk of major civil unrest. And yeah, there's an element of tongue-in-cheek to that, but there's also an element of truth to it. And that's how, unfortunately, the US has descended into this chaos, and we kind of knew it would happen, but there was an expectation in some quarters that Trump would run away with it. Well, that's absolutely proved to not be the case. Anything but running away from it. There's no doubt there's an argument for voter fraud, but Biden had to be close enough, if that is indeed the case, to have got to be in a position where they could push, if that is happening, certain states over the line from a blue perspective rather than a red.
When you take a look at what transpired last night, things were going pretty good. The one thing that started the anomaly was when Fox of all places called Arizona, boom, right when it opened. And then, of course, Ducey came out, the governor. We have 1 million votes that were done on election day, which normally everything across the board has been 2-1 Trump, making up 180,000 votes out of 1 million. That was the first thing. Then Pennsylvania said we're going to stop counting, and it could go for days. A number of different places saying we're going till Friday. What you were saying about then we have Biden's speech, which was on a teleprompter, no less, saying, pretty much laying out, you know what, we got hope, so pay attention to things that are coming. And then all of a sudden, when you wake up this morning, 300,000 votes are made up, 200,000 votes are made up out of nowhere. Because if you take a look at the percentage of votes for Wisconsin and Michigan, it's hardly changed. They added 300,000 votes, and the percentage of votes hardly changed. So where'd they come from? And what you were mentioning about America being suddenly a third world country by what they're doing. Yeah, nothing is legitimate anymore in the U.S. And it's one of the big reasons why the world is quickly isolating America, because it's just a rogue nation.
Yeah, it's sad. It's extremely sad. I occasionally get people getting in touch going, you don't half give the US a hard time. Well, I'm not giving the people a hard time or the nation. I'm giving the wheels that turn the United States politically and economically, financially, etc. Because it's an absolute crying shame that a nation of the stature of the United States is dragged into the gutter by all these processes and the damage it does to the reputation of the nation. And the more this happens, the harder it's going to be to engage with the rest of the world, because I always come back to that one letter word, trust. And when you lose trust with other nations, it's very hard to regain it. And the more this goes on, the more it's all this infighting's happening out in full public glare, which of course with social media, you see it increasing. There's far more coverage than used to be. It just completely undermines the American nation, and more importantly, it undermines the American people, and the American people are the ones who have to suffer the consequences. So that's why I say it. I take absolutely zero pleasure in saying this. It's the worst thing to have to say, but we have to face reality that the US is being dragged into the gutter of the people because of this kind of debacle. And at some point, that has to change. And we've kind of come full circle since last night and what we're discussing. How is that actually going to come about? And I don't want to kind of labor the same points again, but that's fundamentally where we are, and it is a very sad state of affairs. And it, as someone who's spent quite a bit of time in the US, got friends in the US, including obviously yourselves, Ken and CJ. It really is heartbreaking on some level to see this, because it should never have happened to a nation of the US's stature that it ever became the nation it is now.
It's one of the things that stands out to me as being incredibly sad is whether you're liberals, I think a lot of people vote the same type of mentality they had after the Civil War. One of the mantras that came out of the Civil War was vote the way you shot. And so people had a tendency just to vote party lines, and it didn't matter what their policies were. It didn't matter what they intended to do. They were just going to do it for the sake of, well, that's how my daddy voted, and that's how I'm supposed to vote. Nobody thinks for themselves. And, following through with what the intentions are, liberals are voting for their own demise. Because if we go back to the Paris Climate Accords and the Green New Deal and this and that, that is the inevitable destruction of the American financial and monetary systems, period. And so they're voting for their own demise. And it's just, that's the type of insanity that, you know what? We get the government we deserve. And the people have allowed this stuff to happen over the course of 4 or 5 decades. And I'm almost to the point, just bring it. I'm tired of the paper cuts. Let's just end it.
Well, yeah, you do get to that point where you go, we know what's coming. Okay, we don't know to the extent and the gravity of it, but we know what's coming. And in some ways, the sooner it happens, maybe that's what Western nations need. They don't take subtle hints. They don't see the problems because, and you're right, it's the same here, Ken, that predominantly people vote Conservative or Labour, and a lot of it's influenced by their parents and their grandparents, and the vast majority of the country will vote for one or the other. And then there's the swing vote in the middle. I mean, occasionally you'll get, some sort of extreme, which we had in the last election, where there was Labour held seats for 80 years that switched to Conservative. That's unusual, but predominantly it is because we're not engaged in a political system that actually critically thinks what's going on. We just vote for someone every 4 or 5 years, or 5 years in the UK. And then you go, oh, well, they're going to make a difference. Oh, well, they're rubbish, so let's vote the other ones on the swing vote basis. And everyone else just keeps voting, thinking somehow it's going to change. And Western nations need to realize that it's not going to change. And that's the problem. Again, back to Trump. Trump could want to change the world, but as a single entity, it's impossible. He's going to need hundreds of people in all the various State departments, et cetera, that's pulling in his direction to change the US in a constructive way. And then it's a long, drawn-out process. And it's one thing if it was just the political system that was the problem, but when you set it against the backdrop, and it's the same in the UK with all the economic, financial problems and everything else, that just makes the problem infinitely more challenging and difficult to manage. Because if you want to reform a political system, but you've got a stable economy, you might go, well, it's manageable. But when you're trying to wrestle with umpteen problems, all simultaneously, all very acute, that are all interoperable, and you can't distinguish one from the other. We can't separate the economic perspective from what that will do on a political basis as things unfold, how the financial system or the monetary policy impacts the economy, and it's all interlinked, and we can't separate any of those and make some informed decisions. That makes the problem infinitely greater, and that's where I fear, with all due respect, with Trump, people have invested a lot of time and energy in Trump and belief in him, but they're not asking themselves, how is he going to really achieve it? I mean, it's one thing believing in someone to do it and thinking it's possible, but we're now in a situation where we need to face the reality that it's a monumental task, and how is it going to even be remotely achievable? Now, of course, if Biden ends up winning, which we can't dismiss, and okay, whatever the outcome is, let's just say eventually he does, then that causes enormous amounts of problems as well. So there's no solution to this in terms of the current political system and everything else. So, but you can't change it on the fly when there's all these other problems we're trying to address. And so it makes it monumentally difficult. And I think everybody, whatever your people's political persuasion is, needs to realize this as soon as possible, because maybe then that's the shake and the wake-up call. But I don't see most people even seeing it. So normally you have to raise everything to the ground before most people go, oh, now there is a problem. And by the time you reach that, then you compound the problems even more that we've just discussed. So it's very, very challenging.
Gentlemen, I did just a quick search in terms of the election, and maybe Ken can reflect on based, back when Al Gore and the disputed from election, where it ended up, I believe, in Congress or at the Supreme Court in regards to the chaff ballots that were there in Florida. However, looking at some of the state level lawsuits that have already been filed, for the most part, the state courts have sided with the state electoral process, whether it's extending the deadline for mail-in ballots or counting them post the election, as long as they're postmarked through there. I mean, there's tons of different areas we can go, but ultimately it appears the FBI would be responsible for directly investigating any type of potential voting fraud. So I'm not sure, where the case is and where that lies in individual courts, and obviously it would be contested up to the Supreme Court. But do you gentlemen have any thoughts on that?
In regards to, somebody made a really good point last night, and I think it was Dick Morris, of all people, over on Newsmax. The Constitution specifically says that voting determination within each state is determined by the legislature, not the courts. So when the courts were coming on and recently, and especially in Pennsylvania, saying you don't have to have a signature, you don't have to, we'll accept any and all ballots even after election day, it doesn't have to be postmarked. That is not going to hold up taken to the Supreme Court, because the legislature already has in play laws on the books that said you have to have this, it has to be by the day of the election, postmarked. That's already in there. So that's where you're going to get into the area about what the Constitution says and what the states are trying to get away with. The other thing that I was going to mention at one point was it is going to be fascinating to see if Congress or the Senate rushing in Amy Coney Barrett is going to be the determinant factor with the outcome of this election.
Well, do you know what? I made a point in my own podcast that maybe this is why they rushed through her, being joining the Supreme Court, for want of a better word. Maybe that was the reason. But I'm intrigued to know, because I don't understand the process properly, obviously. But let's say within, you say you need postmarked ballots. Well, do they keep all the envelopes off all these ballots? Because and if they don't, how do you prove which arrived after the date, or didn't arrive at all, or arrived before the date? How do you determine that? And if you start to have the state of Pennsylvania versus whoever, how does that pan out from a legal perspective? And
I think not to interrupt you, Paul, but I think it already has. If you gentlemen look at your screen, there has already been a ruling this year, back in November, in regards to the Supreme Court, and that's in fact ties into what Ken just stated. However, in this situation, it looks like the Supreme Court did uphold a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision requiring boards of elections to count mail-in ballots postmarked by November 3rd and received by November the 6th. So it appears there's already been a lawsuit filed, and the Supreme Court said, hey, you know what? We have to go with what the state decides, and we're allowing that. So again, all these states that have kind of modified and changed and leveraging, and I don't say that leveraging may not be the correct word, but utilizing COVID as a reason, right? I think that's for the most part why they're saying, hey, we need to account for all the different mail-in ballots this year because of COVID and people not feeling safe. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting, gentlemen.
But if you notice the key, CJ, postmarked by the 3rd. Okay, I am completely for, if the mail system, the postal system, is a few days late, as long as the individual got it postmarked in the mail by that day. That's absolutely fine in my opinion, and that follows the Supreme Court, I think, ruled correctly on that. But if it's postmarked, 3 or 4 days after the fact, well, you know what? Then why do we even have deadlines? Why do we even have early voting starting 3 months or 3 weeks in advance? Because if people can just, or whoever wants to commit fraud can simply just pull ballots out of a hat after the fact, then elections would never get done.
But yeah, come back to my point though. When these ballots are received, postal ballots, do they keep all the envelopes or just destroy them? Because once the envelope's gone, you can't prove anything as to when it arrived. And that's the point. Because bear in mind, if this goes through, let's just take Pennsylvania as an example and say there's an investigation. By the time this is investigated, a lot of the evidence that you may argue could be utilized to prove things one way or the other isn't going to exist anymore. I mean, I don't believe they keep all the envelopes off, from postal ballots. They probably just get them, open them, rip them up, and throw them in the bin. So you can't then prove whether someone posted it on the 30th of October, or the 7th of, well, whenever the deadline is. And that's where I think that's a very grey area, because you could arguably dispute about every postal ballot if you start saying, well, when was this posted? So I presume they probably just don't keep the envelopes on.
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know Pennsylvania law in this case.
Well, no, exactly. And I'm just throwing the idea is I mean, why would they keep? And how do you correlate the envelope to a vote?
Because a lot of the envelopes that come with the mail-in vote balloting, there is a number on the outside of the ballot or outside of the envelope that corresponds with the signature in your registration.
Oh, so you can't just stick them in an envelope of your own accord. You have to have it in an official.
Correct. And
okay. Well, that might change things.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, they do this to ensure there's not fraud in many cases. When you request a mail-in ballot, it is attributed directly to you. There's a barcode with your registration information and things like that. So that at least is covered, but it doesn't stop the potential fraud that can easly be done by these legislatures. And when you take a look at what the Attorney General did with a couple days leading up to this election, you really can't trust the officials or the process.
Well, do you know, the sad part is we're coming back to one of the deficiencies of the Constitution when it comes to voting, because states can do whatever they like and make their own rules and regulations that were, if you had a situation where there was some central authority that said, right, every state has to abide by these regulations. There's no deviation whatsoever. But when you allow the latitude of 50 states to tinker with and change the regulations and rules, then you're risking exactly this kind of problem.
Actually, probably at the beginning, when the states had more authority and power, and people and the legislatures were closer to the people, and people were right there in the legislative process, it probably wasn't as bad as you might consider. What's made it really worse is getting the courts, state courts, federal courts, over the course of the last 275 years, putting so many different caveats.
Yeah.
That's what made it worse versus,
I'm not saying it was wrong to start with. I'm saying it's wrong now, and it doesn't work anymore. It's one of those examples where it doesn't work, and in the future there needs to be some strict regulation put in place to prevent it. And there needs to be arguably that someone needs to have oversight in every state as to what is going on, and to ensure you don't have the risk of major or to a lesser extent potential voter fraud. Okay, I agree it's difficult in a nation the size of the US, but if this turns out and it's very clear that there is enormous amounts of voter manipulation, then you have to start to say something has got to change in the future.
They should have addressed it in
2000.
Yeah, with the hanging Chad crap, and I guess they thought they did, but in reality, when they started doing predominantly vote, and see, to me, one of the rules are, I don't mind having early voting, but mail-in ballots, unless you're like military overseas, mail-in ballots should not be applicable. If you want to vote, then you need to take the damn responsibility and duty of going and doing it live, signing your name, one vote, one person. Mm-hmm. When they started doing mail-in ballots, that was the key precursor to opening up fraud, period. Because
and
it's
obviously the
completely
coronavirus was just accelerated the risk of that, clearly, because it was an excuse to say, well, people can't, and you're scared of going to, their local polling booths or whatever as we call it, or voting state, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, it was a perfect pretext to say, well, we're going to have extensive mail-in voting, and of course you're absolutely right. That is there's a significant risk of fraud as a result of that.
I wonder if there's changing the subject for just a brief minute, but this year's census information gathering seemed was pretty intense, and I think that's primarily the reason why is because they wanted to ensure like the voting by state that it was not necessarily mirroring, because I know that the census only necessarily gathers the households. I'm not sure if it asks date of birth and everything. I think it does, or asks the age to determine voting. But this year it just seemed it was a little bit more intense because I purposely didn't fill it out. I held off because I'm like, it says it's a violation of federal law. What are they going to do? So I just held off forever. And long story short, I kept getting knocks on my door from census workers asking to fill it out with me. So I finally went online and did it because I thought maybe it'll get serious at some point if I stop answering the door.
Well, anyway. If you think about it, the most important thing to the state regarding the census is, one, it determines, if you gain or lose districts, for representation in the Congress and electoral votes. But two, it also determines how much federal money you get. And in this case, it's all about the greenbacks.
Gotcha.
That's why they wanted you. It was for the money. They could give a crap about you.
Thanks.
Well,
Ken.
that's not very nice, is it? Come on. Poor CJ, No.
And real quick, I continued reading this, and it's going to get interesting. And here's why: because in this decision that was made in regards to the Supreme Court, they said they may have to review it again post-election. But Amy Barrett, who was recently confirmed, she did not vote in the decision. Would there be any play if it does end up at the Supreme Court that they ask that Amy has to recuse herself, from this, knowing that she was nominated during this time period, and in fact that her vote shouldn't be counted as a Supreme Court? What are your gentlemen's thoughts on that?
Well, they can try it, but it's not going to fly.
I think, well,
I think there's legitimate concern for it, Ken. I think
it is. No, I think it is, and I think the other point is if they've already made a ruling on Pennsylvania, they can't then go, we're going to undo that ruling. And here's the other unfortunate, that may say a precedent where other states go, well, you did this for Pennsylvania, so you need to do it for Wisconsin or Michigan or wherever else. And and because that's, I'm no legal eagle, so to speak, but when you have a precedent in law on that basis, then other states will say, well, we're using the Pennsylvania defense, as it were. And it's going to be very hard to then say to other states subsequently, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't apply to you.
Well, in most of the cases that we're finding, the Supreme Court didn't necessarily make a ruling. They just chose not to take on the case.
Correct.
That's the reason why that's the reason why Amy Barrett, these things can change, because now all of a sudden she may be the deciding factor. Yeah, we're gonna take on the case. We're gonna take a look at it. And so precedent hasn't really been set.
Yeah, but then the argument's going to be, and this is why again, a Supreme Court should not be loaded with partisan politicians or partisan people. Sorry, not politicians who are inclined to be Republicans or Democrats. I mean, from my perspective, looking from the outside in, it's an utterly flawed system. You need to have complete impartiality with regards to the Supreme Court, because you don't want it skewed one way or the other, because at some point in history, you may have everything skewed to the Democrat side or the Republican side. And that's not the way to have a Supreme Court making decisions. And you can guarantee that will be another defense that used against the Supreme Court if it ever gets to the Supreme Court. And here's the question: how many months, or even could we still be talking about an unresolved election in 6 months' time? This is
No,
how ludicrous it could be.
The electoral things have to be in constitutionally, like they're following that anyway. No later than, I think, December 4th.
Yeah, but what happens if there's all these unresolved cases?
They'll
What are they going
resolve
to do?
it.
Just
They'll resolve it. I mean,
yeah, but how though? And then what does that? What's the repercussions for that? I mean, that could work many ways. So
I know what you're saying, but they're gonna come to a quick decision. I mean, they're gonna have to take the evidence and make a decision based on whatever, because in this case, it's the same thing why they quickly adjudicated the hanging chads like they did.
oh yeah, I can remember.
It's gonna be done quick.
Very clearly at the time. So yeah, I mean, yes, but then of course that whatever ruling they may come to by that date, and then it's the fallout of what that means, because whoever loses on that basis is going to create an enormous shitstorm, literally, from one side or the other. So.
True, but one side has already been burning down and destroying cities even before the election came. So what we're seeing is the inevitability. One, it's the politics of dead center. Things are so close that a little bit of fraud pushes it from one side to another. The second thing is that the division in America has reached the point that it doesn't matter. The outcome of revolution is inevitable. And I've been saying this ever since Occupy Wall Street. I don't know if you remember the quote from JFK, but he said that making peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.
Crazy enough, Ken, when I got home, I posted that last night on my Facebook post. Look at it.
Yeah.
and specifically the reason why I did that was because I was seeing so many posts, and I think I shared this with you, Paul, earlier, maybe at the event I was at last night, where I saw so many people posting that, hey, listen, regardless of the election results, let's all come together as a country. Let's all hug and kumbaya and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, wait a minute. I can sign up for that, but that's only if the people that we elect uphold and follow the Constitution and also our civil liberties. And if they don't, here's a quick reminder coming from a Democrat who stated that, Ken. So that was perfect timing. Thank you for that.
Sweet.
Well, the other problem is, though, okay, let's assume the outcome is Biden wins and it goes through whatever legal process and he's confirmed as winning. The question is, what does the Trump supporters do as a result of that? Because in their mindset, doesn't matter what legal rulings made. And I'm not saying the Democrats won't do the same. Let's just, take the two scenarios. They're never going to agree to this. They'll be talking about it in 20, 30 years about how the election was stolen from Trump. How are they going to react? I mean, how are supporters of Trump? I mean, they're just going to sit there and go, okay, well, we're really angry about this. The risk is they will start to incite or violence, and then that means the opposition will then join it, and then you've got the two feuding sides in some sort of, for want of a better word, it's not a civil war, but it's like opposite sides of this faux political spectrum who'll be at kind of war with each other. And then the flip side is, it could equally happen where if Biden loses and it goes through due process, they'll claim that it was illegal and they should have won. And so in that sense, the risk is you're going to get both of these sides warring with each other on some level, irrespective of the outcome. But I think it would actually be worse if Trump loses than if Biden loses.
Ken, go for it, and then I'll have a comment after that. Go for it.
No, I agree. And, it's something I mentioned, Paul and I have talked about. It's the ogre's choice. It didn't matter if Trump won or wins. It doesn't matter if Biden wins. It's just a matter of how quickly the country is going to be to its inevitable end. The ogre's choice: die quickly or die slowly. Either way, America is doomed. And so the problem does really spawn most of the liberal, Marxist, whatever violence that we're seeing is not homegrown. It's not naturally spawned. These are paid, well-funded institutions or organizations that are doing this. What we saw, like with the Trump rally, with a lot of the other stuff, is more along the lines of, people wanting to come out, patriotism, rah, 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 rah. So does that mean that if Trump loses or he's cheated out of the election, whatever, that the people are going to have the fortitude to be willing to do what Antifa has been doing, what Black Lives Matter have been doing? That's a great question. And I'm not sure that most conservative Americans are at that point of taking it to the streets. So they'll probably be passive like they were during Clinton and Obama and all this other stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's against the backdrop. Sorry, CJ, just one quick comment. That's against the backdrop of the worst economic collapse or decline or whatever you want to put in our history. I mean, so there's a lot of other factors. In 2008, okay, we had the election just after obviously Lehman, etc. But Lehman was the global financial crisis then is nothing compared to what we're having now.
Yeah, no, my comment was this, it does appear for the most part at this point, in regards to the House and the Senate, it does appear like the Senate will remain in the Republican Party and the House will remain in the Democratic Party. The Republicans did pick up a few seats there. And arguably, I think that's what it boils down to, regardless of who becomes the president of the United States. We're still going to end up in, unfortunately, massive, gridlock between the House and the Senate, and what gets passed, what gets accomplished, and then essentially where it ends up in the Oval Office. And I think that lies the problem with, Paul, something that you had mentioned a few times in regards to the U.S. Constitution, is that these executive orders that have been, and not only under Trump but also Obama, really for the most surpass the legislative portion of what our republic was established. And hence why I have the same problem with that here in Indiana, where we have a Republican governor who continues to not even call the legislature back into session for these important matters and just strictly passing executive orders. And I think that's where the real danger lies ahead in regards to, okay, you know what? I can't get anything done through the House and the Senate. I'm just going to executive order. And by no means, that's not what our republic was intended for. And I'm not sure what the solution is. However, it's very problematic when we do have a president who continues to legislate through executive orders.
Actually, just a small point. I've just, on this ticker I've got with stuff, the Wisconsin Republican governor said he's not giving Trump much of a chance, for what it's worth. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
No doubt.
But why would it, currently there's 20,000 vote difference. What I'm seeing, 95% reporting. Why would a Republican governor just come out and say that?
Because many of the Republicans have been anti-Trump from the very beginning.
True. Yeah.
The resistance, the Lincoln organization, whatever, think about the irony in this. You have, what was her name? Kellyanne Conway, who was a Trump campaign manager, and her husband is part of the resistance. I mean, the just the thoughts on this are just beyond insane. And in the end, that's why I think it doesn't matter, because the insanity and the logic has been thrown out so much that America's outcome is inevitable.
Well,
And
do you know what?
that's what we've
Sorry,
been
go on.
promoting.
Carry on.
I was going to say that's what we've been. I don't want to say preaching, but we've been laying out this scenario. You, me, CJ, Jim, up to a point. We've been laying out this scenario for a while now. It doesn't matter. America's outcome is already predetermined from the choices that they've made
for a very long time.
Ken, you're way too negative today, Ken. I do not like this from you. Okay, I'm just going to turn you off and shut you down right now. No, I'm just kidding.
The reason I can do the negative and the positive is because I'm a pragmatist.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what I love about you, Ken.
But do you know the truth? And you come back to this point from conversation I had back in 2010, sort of revolving around the whole reset. What was going to happen in the West, what the expectation was in the East, and the one overriding thing was for me that when we got to 2010, that the West had made incredibly bad decisions, and QE zero interest rate policy was the final nail in the coffin lid of fiscal, economic, and financial policies. But when I had the conversation, the exact words to me were, what is going to happen is the West will be completely gutted. It will be razed to the ground because it is the only way that the West will ever change its attitudes, change how it conducts business on the world stage, how it interacts within nations. Because the belief back then is the West is so lost its way. It's not. And in many senses this is true. And let's not just pick on America. Let's look at Europe. Look at the UK. I know I'm not trying to be nostalgic and saying the good old days, because the good old days is a lot of it's bullshit. But there was definitely a different attitude in people, how they interacted with each other in terms of how neighbors were with each other. And there's been this gradual erosion of everything. And as was said to me, it all has to go. The whole lot has to go. And it's because it's only then that, when everything's gone, that people will suddenly turn around and go, right, something has to change. What has to change? And that's the rebuild process that, and we're back to the old comment, it's a reboot of humanity. It's in terms of our values, what we consider to be important, what we think matters. And, at some point in the future, we'll look back and go, why did we behave this way? Why were we in the early 21st century treating each other within our own nations and treating other nations? It will be abhorrent to people. But until we get to that bottom where everything, like you say, Ken, and everything's totally deconstructed, you don't see that happening. It shouldn't ever come to this. But unfortunately, it's an inevitability, and it's not just the US, it's the UK, it's Europe, and it's nations that need to recognize and change their values. Now, I'm not saying that excludes all the Southeast Asian nations. China, all these nations are all perfect, wonderful, and they don't have to do anything. Of course they do, but at least they are making changes and making progress, and they're in the ascendancy and in rising for the last 75 years. From my perspective, we've just been in this gradual decline for. And the more I look at it, the more we're researching what we're doing with this reset. But it was really prior to World War I when the West completely lost its way, and it's been staggering to this position now, and we're kind of in the latter stages of this collapse. And sadly, it seems to be the only way, because we didn't pick up on the problems. Okay, there's all whoever controls things and does things, but we didn't learn the lesson after World War I or World War II, and we just carried on and on and on through all these decades, making all the wrong decisions, all the wrong choices. And inevitably, at some point when you do that, we end up where we are. And if we haven't learned from history now, we're certainly not going to learn now when we're at the sort of cusp of the end of it all, because, in fact, people are desperately fighting to hang on to this system because they actually believe what's going to replace it is far worse. because and also because of the fact we're back to this thing, everyone says, well, it can't happen organically. It must be engineered. There must be some devious plan. Well, no, it's the end. It's gone. And we need to face, there is this big vacuum. And it's our opportunity to fill that vacuum collectively and make the right choices going forward. And we have to do that. Because if we don't, we just sit back. Then what fills the vacuum is something that is not going to be in the short term beneficial to us as humanity.
Paul, I'm going to consider that your closing comments, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then Ken, I'll afford you the opportunity as well.
Yeah, one of the things that stands out to me, and I know that I don't know if necessarily you and I, Paul, have gone as back and forth regarding China. You know, every single country, no matter how benevolent or whatever, they are going to do things for their best interest.
Mm-hmm.
We know with the Bidens that if they're easily bought and paid for, like we saw in China, in Ukraine, then China, Russia, whoever are going to use a Biden presidency for their benefit. Every nation is going to do it, and if government is stupid enough to, our people are stupid enough to elect corrupt administrators, and they get what they're going to get. But with that being said, what's going to come out of this is the same thing that we saw under the Obama administration. Obama did not run anything. The State Department, the military-industrial complex, the intelligence services, the CIA, they ran the country. Obama's a figurehead. Biden's a figurehead. Kamala, who's dumb as a box of rocks, is going to be a figurehead. The difference that Trump stood out for was Trump thought he was smart enough and to be able to do things, and he tried to do things. So at least he owned up and took responsibility for the actions that he took. But what we're going to see right now coming forward is if a Biden wins this, he's going to be either forced out or stepped down after he gets his name put in the history books as the 46th president. Then the 47th president, Kamala, is going to come in, but America is going to be really run by the remnants of the Cold War, the Wolfowitz Doctrine, and the military and intelligence agencies. And that is going to be the last straw that the rest of the world uses to reject, because, as you mentioned, after World War I, the same people who thought they could rule the world the way they did leading up to that point are not going to change. Then they're going to think that they can do something different and bring about this globalist and one world government. And that's, you've mentioned before, Paul, that the deep state and the globalists are done. Well, in the East, they're done, but in the West, they're still going. And that's shown right now what's going on in Europe regarding these lockdowns and the incompetency of Macron and Merkel. We're seeing this here with the fraud that is pretty much blatant going into the elections. They still have a great deal of control in their limited sphere and regions. But what it's going to do is they have not admitted that they are no longer the hegemonic power that they were after the Cold War ended in 1991. And that is going to be really to the detriment of people in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, and probably leading down into South and Central America.
Yeah, just one very, very brief point.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The only difference is, Ken, they are at the end of their serviceable life, because they internally within nations, everything will collapse. And the thing that's kept their empire going is the dollar. Well, the dollar's dead. Once they don't have the dollar, what have they got? They can't instigate anything on a global scale, but internally, yeah, of course, everything will just descend more and more into chaos. Everything will fall apart, and at that point, they'll have lost everything. Because the one thing they never wanted was to have to deal with internal problems the way they're going to have to deal with, and they have no answer to it. So So in that sense, yes, you're right. Part of the world, they have absolutely no control. But internally, they're losing control on a weekly, monthly basis, and they're never going to be able to implement the things that people think they're going to implement, because it just simply isn't. Well, anyway, we'll have to park it, because otherwise we'll get onto a whole different subject that will take about half an hour to discuss. But I understand people's fear and reticence to that something worse is going to replace it, but it won't. Once this empire is gone, it's gone. The risk is a temporary vacuum that could be filled by something that is worse, but it will only last for a certain period of time, because in the end, as I come back to the point, if everyone in the US has to pay $5 for a loaf of bread, which is where we're going, the American people will go, right, that's it, we've had enough. And they're never going to be able to control 300 odd million people in a country of 4 million square miles.
Ken, Paul, I want to thank you both for an absolutely great discussion. And for our Gadfly subscribers, I want to thank you again for subscribing to our multi-channel network. For those who are tuning in for the very first time, we created the Gadfly in part to really counter the censorship that's occurring on YouTube. And not only that, really to stop giving them free ad revenue from content that it's created on YouTube. And so that hence is why we created the Gadfly. Again, you can start a 30-day subscription. Our contributors, we have a great lineup of team, whether it's Jim Willie, London Paul, who's with us today, as well as Ken Shortgun Jr. I'm going to throw another teaser out there. We will be adding another contributor hopefully very soon. I just working out the final details of that. So start your 30-day subscription where you can learn, and again, great content that we're producing. And that's going to wrap it up for this session. So, gentlemen, thank you both very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.